Mankind has conquered the stars. He moves out to the endless interstellar reaches of the universe. Seek out unstable planets and destroy them.
Hyperdrive sequence begun. Hit it, Pinback.
And you are on the mission of the 21st century planet smashers. Dark Star.
I grew up primarily on the Jersey Shore. I was born in New York City.
Uh-huh.
But by third grade and through high school, I was on the Jersey Shore, and I was in a rock band, but I wasn't in Bruce Springsteen's. He also started at the same time, but I was in the wrong band. If I was in his band, my life would be different. But I still have a full set of drums right here in my office.
So you were quite creative even as a child?
Well, I started cartooning when I was 8 years old, published when I was about 13. And then, I wound up obviously going to film school. So that when you're an actor, and also I was acting, and so when acting and cartooning and film school get together, you wind up falling into animation.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens to you. Carpenter walked in the room and said, will you be in my next film? Matter of fact, Carpenter and I, and Terry and Alec Larimore, we used to jam together just as a impromptu band when we lived together. Because John is very musical. His father's a professor of music at University of Kentucky, and that explains why John has done the soundtracks for his movies. And one time for Doe Mayer, another fellow student who's now on the faculty of USC, John did a score for her film, and he had a small orchestra. He conducted a small orchestra for the score, and he knew that I played trombone with my mouth.
Right.
He actually put me in the orchestra as second trombone.
Right.
Without the trombone. First trombone sat down and looked at me like, where the hell is your trombone? And I don't even read music. So I asked first trombone if he could play the first 8 measures or so. And he played it on his trombone. And I said, thank you. And I'm like a parrot. I lean into the microphone and I go, whatever it was, And he looks at me like I'm from fucking Mars, And then Carpenter gave me the trombone solo. But we didn't do it until 2 p.m. because first trombone had to leave like at lunchtime. He had a gig or something.
Yeah.
So John didn't want to give me the solo in front of a real trombone player. So this is probably one of the funniest things John and I ever did together. But he took a boom mic and he hung it from the middle of the room, and I stood in front of the orchestra. And when it came time for my solo, the glass window on the recording studio was like just plastered with faces of people in disbelief as they watched the string section and the clarinets and everything go dead silent, and I did my solo. And every time I would do one take, I would run out of air and almost faint. I'd sort of collapse into a chair, catch my breath, and do another one. That's the kind of crazy shit that went on in film school, And then, of course, there was a day after it was all over, and there was a short version of Dark Star, and that's when he took me out to lunch and said, I'm going to make you a movie star. I said, what the hell are you talking about? And then he explained how we were going to go uptown and continue shooting and build it out into a feature. And lo and behold, that's what happened. The university was not happy about that because he basically stole the footage and the soundtrack, which they claimed ownership to. But they didn't have anything. They didn't have stuff firm on paper about that. They couldn't do much about it. But I kind of avoided going back to USC for a while because I thought I might be held in guilt by association, although I had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
However, I must tell you, I did catch a face full of wrath from Ray Bradbury. I met him at one of the Comic-Cons in San Diego, where I've been a guest a number of times. And I was introduced to him in the context of Dark Star.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw me as its representative, which I was, and I had no idea that Carpenter had lifted some ideas from some of his writings and used them in the film somehow. I don't even know how. But anyway, I caught his wrath. He unloaded on me. And his eyeglasses are like magnifying glasses that you can burn insects with the sun, you know? And so I just had to stand there and take it. It was very uncomfortable. And I still don't know exactly what Carpenter stole, per se. But anyway, that was no fun.
How did John sell the concept of Dark Star to you when you first got involved?
Well, he came in the room while I was doing that animation for Terry, and he just said, will you be in my next film? And he had just won Academy Award for student film, a student Oscar as part of the big ceremony on TV. And the people who got to go are the head of the film department, who had nothing to do with it, and the student producer, not the director or anybody else, but the student producer, whatever that was. So those two guys got to wear tuxedos and go to the Oscars. Meanwhile, back in our house we shared in the Hollywood Hills, I'm in Chuck Adair's bedroom with Dale Belden, and we're watching, the Oscars on TV. And John Carpenter is in his bedroom with his girlfriend, which is down the hall off the kitchen, and he's watching in there. And it comes time for the winner of the Student Academy Award, and the winner is The Resurrection of Bronco Billy, University of California Division of Cinema. And so those two guys go up and get the Oscar, and we're jumping up and down because John just won a goddamn Oscar. And I went to the kitchen to get something. At the same time, John came out of his bedroom to grab a Coke out of the fridge. So I bumped into him in the kitchen, and I shook his hand. I congratulated him. And he went back in his bedroom, and I went back in Chuck Adair's bedroom. We watched the rest of the Oscars. So that was the whole glamorous thing right there in the kitchen with a Coke. So by the time he came in and asked me to be in his next film, number one, everybody was always helping everybody out. That was routine. But he just won a goddamn Oscar, So anyway, he was also aware of the fact that I was acting because, if you read that thing I wrote, I was told, you can't do that. And once I started going over to theater, it's just too much. You can't do that. And so I said, screw you. And, of course, I did. And so, John was aware of that. So he said, would you? And I said, okay. But then it was that critical timing thing where I said, well, I got to direct soon, and there are all these different pressures. And he said, well, we'll do it in November. Okay, we'll do it in November. And, of course, it took 3 years. Every time he had enough money to do something. And what they did, my understanding is that he and probably Dan as well, they took their tuition money and they used it to buy film instead of pay the school. So not only did they lift the film, I don't think they ever got their degrees. They were just working the system to their advantage. It worked.
Yeah.
I was, meanwhile, taking a stupid geography class so I could get my degree, which I did. But I don't think they had other ways of doing things. So that was all there was to it. It was just being my... He didn't say what it was, And then I organized a little gathering at one point because I wanted to do some improv and explore the characters and talk about that kind of thing. And it became very clear early in that aborted meeting that they didn't have a lot of interest in that. It was more like, show up and do what we tell you.
Yeah.
All right, I can do that. And then we started, and they, Dan, built the control room in the soundstage of the film department, which you're only supposed to commandeer for, I don't know, maybe a week, because all these other people need it. Well, they commandeered it for weeks. That's just the way it was until we got uptown in a real soundstage.
So about the sets then?
Oh, Dan did most all of that. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Alejandro Jodorowsky's attempt to create the film Dune. Have you seen that documentary?
I have, yes.
Well, it features Dark Star.
Yeah.
Because when he went to look for special effects and he saw Dark Star, that's when he came over. Dan and I were living on Menlo Avenue, and Jodorowsky picked him up one afternoon and drove him around. And, that's when they hooked up before he sent him off to Paris. I remember, I wasn't there when that happened, but I remember Dan saying that, that guy's crazy. That guy's crazy. But crazy in a good way, And, boy, that would have been a hell of a film.
Yes.
That gave Dan the connections to all those artists that would make Alien possible. And Giro, whatever his name is. Anyway, he can certainly thank Jodorowsky for that. That's all there was to it in terms of casting. Should we be in my next show? Oh, okay.
Did you get paid for it, or was it just helping out?
I got totally. Well, when we got uptown, in the soundstage in Hollywood, one day John presented all of us, there aren't many of us, contracts and release forms. And he said, you need to sign all this stuff so that it can be released, and included this contract that included percentages of net after blah, 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 all that blah, 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 blah. And everybody else just sort of scribbled and signed it. And I said, well, I want to show this to my attorney. That annoyed John, but what could he do? And my attorney, who was really pro bono, I was sort of like a pet. He would help me out, but I didn't have any money, right?
Yeah.
He was the former managing attorney for the Screen Actors Guild.
Right.
And he looked over the contract and he said, this doesn't make any sense. And he says, I know this attorney. He didn't write this. Some clown in his office may have written it, but he didn't write it. He said, you're not signing this. So I went back to John and I said, on the advice of my attorney, I'm not signing this. And he said, well, if you don't sign this, blah, 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 blah. Well, blah, 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 nothing. It didn't mean anything because it got released and it did what it did. So basically, I got paid nothing. And the only money I've really got was maybe 2 years ago from the BBC because they did a 3-part series on the history of sci-fi. And under SAG contract rules, they paid me a chunk of money. And that's 40 years later, that's the first payment, really. There was a payment for a dubbing session, which I had to actually sue to get the money. I'm talking about $250.
Yeah.
I had to sue for it. As soon as I sent in a sheriff with a gun to deliver the papers, I had to pay extra for the gun. They cut the check that afternoon. But on the back of the check, they wrote this whole paragraph about how endorsement of this check is payment in full for all services rendered, on the whole film. And this was for a dubbing session. And I scratched that crap out. And I said, this is what it's for. And then I signed it and cashed it really, really fast. No. So it was just a load of crap. And did I ever get paid? Actually, no.
Right.
Only by the BBC. Yeah.
Yeah, you shared a house with both John and Dan, didn't you? What was Dan like to live with?
Shall we say a loose cannon? I wasn't there the day that I heard that a car was going up and down the street, a really loud, noisy car that annoyed him. And I heard that he went out and started shooting at his tires. Now, I wasn't there. I can't validate that, but I don't doubt it either. You know what I mean? I didn't live with Dan very long on Narelle. I lived with John longer up on Gramercy Place. There were about 7 of us in that house, and we had just moved there after finding a place in a sort of gated community where ambassadors live on Wilshire. And we lived there for about 5 or 6 days before neighbors figured out that this clown show of film students had just occupied a mansion. There were a lot of us. And there's zoning laws about single-family dwellings and stuff. And so they had us thrown out in about a week. But then we found a house up in Hollywood Hills, and like 7 of us moved into there. That's when John came out of the kitchen for the Coke.
Yeah.
So film school was a very intimate sharing. And Terry Winkless lived there too. And one afternoon, when I was working on a film, I wasn't directing it. I don't know if I was shooting it or what, but we were in the hills of Malibu after one of those bad Malibu fires. And so it was almost still smoldering, but it was a post-apocalyptic kind of a scene. So it was perfect. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better smoking apocalyptic scene. And so we were shooting up there, and it's extremely quiet because nobody lives there. It's all burned, right? But then this little Cessna airplane comes over, starts circling for about 20 minutes. We cannot shoot. I mean, we can't. I mean, we're not dubbing this later. We need live sound, So we waited like 20 minutes for this annoying mosquito to go away. And then at the end of the day, I go back home where I live with all these guys in the hills. And Terry comes home and says something about his flight lesson today. I said, wait a minute. Were you over Malibu around 2 o'clock? He said, yeah, why? I go, you son of a bitch. Out of 7 million people, my roommate is screwing up our shoot.
When I found out you lived with Dan, the scene in Dark Star where everyone's just sort of chilling out and Dan's walking around with rubber chickens and eyes on springs and stuff. Was it anything like that at all?
No, they're pretty serious about when we're working. The thing about that scene that I can barely stand to watch is when Boiler takes out that knife and starts doing that stabby thing between his fingers. I was standing right there, beside him off camera when he actually stabbed his finger, and he did not mean to. But he was a trooper. He just kept going. I watched his finger turn white, and I saw the blood fill up in it, and I was watching, but the sound of the knife going in was really horrible. As soon as Carpenter yelled cut, then Cal went, son of a bitch. He kept his cool, even after stabbing himself. So immediately, Carpenter calls for a low tripod so he can get an up-angle reaction shot, and they didn't use that in the film, but it was obvious that he wasn't going to waste that,
Yeah.
And it is in the film. So every time I see it, which isn't very often, but when I do, I kind of have to look away because people might think that's a fake finger or something. It's not a fake finger. And while you can't really hear the gunching sound that I actually heard, I still remember it. So it bothers me. But if there was any bloodletting, Carpenter was certainly going to take advantage of it.
So when you started filming Dark Star, I mean, it's obviously very low budget, and everything had to be done quite quickly. What were the props like? I mean, I saw them in the film, but did you have to improvise quite often, get them to look proper?
My control panel, or our control panels, they have illuminated buttons that are backlit, upside-down plastic ice cube trays.
Right.
I mean, it's just riddled with that kind of thing. And I was at my girlfriend's house, Melissa. I was at her house when she bought a new Sony TV, a little one, but it came in a big box, with that white plastic stuff all around it,
Yeah.
And so she took the plastic stuff out and hooked up her TV, and she was about to throw away the white plastic stuff. And I said, no, give that to me. And so I took it, and I just gave it to O'Bannon. And I never saw it again until the world premiere on Hollywood Boulevard in '74, when Talby enters the airlock in his spacesuit. The back of his spacesuit has these big white things, and that's the packing from Melissa Norman's TV set.
Wow.
And I'm falling out of the chair laughing because nobody else would know what's so funny. And actually, I went to see a retrospective. They did a whole 3-day Carpenter retrospective at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. And it started with Dark Star, for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And my brother-in-law was there. I don't know if you'd ever seen it. Anyway, I had clued him in ahead of time about the TV packing, about the ice cube trays. I mean, the front of my spacesuit is an inverted plastic dish drying rack. I mean, it's full of things like this. And so I'm sitting next to Michael, my brother-in-law, and every now and then I'll hear him snickering, not because anybody said anything funny on screen, but he just realized what that is. He just noticed some piece of household appliance in the movie. I get a charge out of that. Also, the ridiculousness of going into hyperdrive and then stopping on a dime, coming to a full stop, and just imagining the laws of physics, how one would smash into protoplasm in the nose of the ship if you did that. Or things like bomb number 19 and bomb number 20. Look at the size of those bombs. Look at the size of that ship. There's so many things. But there was a list a year or two ago on Facebook, or where lists appear, and it was the only 10 films you need to see to learn to make movies. And it included some classics like Citizen Kane, Kurosawa. I mean, there's some basic stuff you can imagine. But it also included Dark Star among the 10 films you need to see. And the reason it was on the list is because if you don't have any money and you're using that for an excuse, forget it. Because look what these guys did with nothing, So the whole film, including special effects and optical blow-up to 35 millimeter from 16, the whole thing was $60,000. Now, I've worked on some TV series and movies recently here, where I'm sure that's the budget for the food for one day. What was done with nothing was really miraculous.
So tell us about the freezer scene.
As I mentioned, as I wrote, we were going to do this in November, and it kept expanding and getting a life of its own, going on for 2-3 years. So by the summer, I was actually walking across campus, and I saw my acting buddies and a theater professor sitting on a bench, and I just plopped down with them just to say hello. And the professor turns to me. He says, "Want to go to Europe?" And I looked at him like, "What?" And I go, "When?" He goes, "Next week." I go, "For how long?" "For 2 months." And I go, "Who's paying for this?" He said, "We are." And I turned to my friend Chris Capen, actor friend, and I said, "Is he bullshitting me?" And he said, "No." So I had to go home and make some fast arrangements, because a week later I was in Amsterdam. We opened in Germany about a week and a half later. I toured Europe for the whole summer with USC Theater on full scholarship. So I informed Dan and John that I was leaving. I mean, I didn't know I was leaving until then, you know. And they hadn't done the freezer scene yet, and they had, I don't know what ambitions they had for it, but they had to throw the freezer scene together really fast.
Yeah.
And they were very unhappy with me that I had the audacity to have a life of my own or do anything else, although this is dragging on for literally for years. And so that wasn't the most cordial setup. And like I wrote, I have no idea if the kerosene mist was vengeful or just all they could get their hands on. But do not try acting in kerosene mist.
Right.
That is toxic shit. So the beginning of the scene, I'm coming down the ladder. Before action, I have a wet face cloth pressed to my face, because you do not want to breathe this shit. Every time John yelled action, I would just throw the face cloth away, and turn around and do a take on that scene. And then we go back to me and the face cloth, and they pump more kerosene. It's nasty stuff. It's also very slippery. I could have just slipped on my ass at any moment. And we never took a break until Carpenter. When Carpenter couldn't take it anymore behind the camera, then we took a break. You know? But that was wicked. And of course, we're shooting 16 millimeter in those days, color, and it takes a hell of a lot of foot candles. It's not like today.
Yeah.
So a lot of lights, and it's really hot. It's not as hot as being in my spacesuit, but I mean, for a scene that's supposed to be freezing cold, it ain't cold.
Yeah.
But the worst part of it is just trying to breathe, you know, and do the scene. And like I wrote about the spacesuit, that was another breathing problem that they hadn't thought of ahead of time. But as soon as they put the helmet on me in under those lights, immediately it fogged up, because there's no ventilation. And that's when Dan found the plastic tube and stuck it in my mouth. And every take, every single line, he would walk me out, because with my thrusters and all, I had to go out the door sideways. It was awkward to move, and then he'd rip the helmet off my head, which would take my ears with it. That hurt. And then he would put a cold compress on the back of my neck, also on my forehead. He'd have like 2 cold, wet cloths, and he would lower my body temperature, because I was boiling in there. Because I'm inside insulation duct stuff. I'm taped to ski gloves, you know, which is great if you're in the snow, but not if you're in a furnace, you know. And I go back in, and one line at a time, one take at a time, that whole process with the cold compresses, you know. And, you know, when I hear about, or you think about the idea of the glamour of Hollywood, I'm like, what? We're talking torture. And I've actually in the past, I've had the option from a director. I'm in a film production of Shakespeare's Henry V, and I was offered Henry's uncle or the Archbishop of Canterbury, whichever role I wanted. And I actually chose the Archbishop of Canterbury for totally practical reasons, because I understood how much hurry up and wait there is in a film production. And I pictured myself on a real horse in the woods, freezing to death with a sword, or falling off, or getting hit, or, you know, all the things that can happen to you on a horse with a sword. It just didn't sound good. So I wound up as the Archbishop of Canterbury, because it's almost entirely, you know, interiors. That had its own problems, but I didn't fall off any horses. After a while, you start to think practically.
I always thought that a lot of Dark Star was quite bleak, especially your role. You deliver some of the best lines, but at times you've obviously got sort of manic depression, and you just want to be on your own a lot of the time. You got your little water organ organised. Was it difficult to play that sort of role?
No. I mean, like, there are times when I'm doing a video log report, and Pinback, Dan, keeps, you know, nudging in to whisper shit to me, complaining about the seat back and all that. And the thing is that Dan was such a loose cannon that when he leaned in, it's like I would lean the other way. I mean, it's not hard to do, you know. It's like, oh shit, get away from me, you know. The whole line, don't give me any intelligent life crap. Just find me something I can blow up.
Yeah.
That line kind of haunts me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that was a dubbed line.
Oh, was it?
Because it was originally, don't give me any of that intelligent life shit. Just find me something I can blow up. But shit had to come out, and a couple of things had to come out to get a G rating.
Right.
And my understanding is that Carpenter, the producer Jack Harris, apparently they wouldn't let Dan even meet with him because Dan would have maybe, brought a gun, you know, it was an ass. But John is a very genteel and diplomatic and from Kentucky, you know.
Mm.
So I guess he just did all the dealing with him, as I understand it. But apparently Jack Harris, he was now the producer when we went uptown, okay? And he wanted some flashback scenes of me on the beach being a surfer, you know, with some bikini babes and jiggling boobs and running down the beach kind of stuff. And John was like, no way, not doing that. And John won that battle. God bless him, you know. But in reality, I've been up on the surfboard like once. I fell off immediately. But I do love to body surf. But standing up on a board, that didn't work out so well. No, I was going to say that I understand that when it made its rounds in Australia long ago, it was a big hit among surfers. They like that because it took so long to happen. But it still has this life. Like what I sent you, I was just interviewed this guy in Italy a few days ago. And a few months ago, I got home and there was a package on my front door, a box, a big box. And I sometimes order stuff from Amazon, you know, like books or something. Yeah. But not a big-ass box. So it really confused me. Like, what the hell did I order and why, you know? Yeah. And I opened it, and I didn't order it at all. It was a gift from a Dark Star fan. And I'm looking at it right now, and he replicated my helmet completely, down to the numbers and details and the writing, everything about it. He just did that as a gift and sent it to me, and I was stunned because there's nothing left of that film. There's no swag, there's no memorabilia, there's absolutely nothing. And the only thing I was aware of that was left was bomb number 20, which my friend Dale Belden had. He worked on the film. He's an editor down in Hollywood, and he lived down on the beach near where I lived, and he told me that at one point he had it on a shelf in his apartment, and there was an earthquake, which that happens, and it fell off the shelf and it broke, and so he just threw it away. He didn't fix it, he just threw it away. I went, no, you didn't. The bomb number 20 is from model kit of a trailer truck, back of an 18-wheeler, and it's got pieces of Battleship stuck all over it. and it comes out of the bomb bay filmed upside down. That's actually the camera plate on a Fisher dolly. So it's actually coming up and going down. Camera's upside down. So it's about, I imagine it was about 12 inches long. And then, of course, like I say, there's no swag, there's no nothing. Online, I discovered a model maker who makes all kinds of real NASA stuff and also Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica, all that stuff. And he actually makes a Dark Star model. You have to put it together, but it's made out of resin. It's not plastic. Anyway, I wrote him because he's in Cornwall, and it had a price on it, but I have no idea how to translate the money and the shipping cost, and I didn't know what to do. So I wrote him and I had to ask him, and he said, "You're not paying for it." He sent it to me, and I put it together, and now I have it. So I have a model of the ship, and I have my helmet. And over the years, I mentioned a couple of people, like Robert Watts from Star Wars, and Volker Engel from Independence Day. And, I bump into Dark Star fans in the most amazing places, and where you might not expect. But, in the beginning, when it opened in 45 theaters all across L.A., and nobody knew what it was, who was in it, who did it, how would they? You know what I mean? So that's when O'Bannon went to watch an audience and was so bummed out. He said, fuck them if I can't make them laugh, I'll scare the shit out of them. and then he wrote Alien. And that worked. I went to his memorial, it's maybe 10 years ago now. His dad died. I went down to Santa Monica, and I hooked up with classmates I hadn't seen in, forever, including Nick Castle, who directed The Last Starfighter and Tap, and Bennett Tramer, who's a producer. And three of us are standing there, and I realized we're all 6'2". And then they told me that both of them were my doubles in the film. I knew they were doubles. I never knew who. I had no idea. But like when I'm up in the two-shot in the dome talking to Talby, I never met Talby. I never met him. When I'm talking to him, I'm actually talking to a light stand. There's nobody there. But I did meet him in the lobby of the hotel at the premiere of the film. And Cal, who played Boiler, didn't make it to the premiere because he had wiped out on his motorcycle and his face was no longer in shape. He has since died. But during that dubbing session I referred to, that I had to sue about, he offered to get me back to my car on his motorcycle, which is just a few blocks away. So I said, okay. I got on the back of his motorcycle, and he took off. It was like, holy shit, I am never getting on this guy's motorcycle again. It's like, this guy is nuts. Well, I never did, and then he missed the premiere because he wiped out on his motorcycle. And then Talby, Andre, like I said, I met him in the lobby, and that was the only time. And no one knows anything about him anymore. I've asked Diane O'Bannon. She doesn't know. He went back to the Midwest. He disappeared. No clue. So I'm the only survivor that I'm aware of the ship, And when I went down to Dan's, I did a cartoon for his wife, because over the years, it wasn't just Dark Star anymore. It's John Carpenter's Dark Star.
Yeah.
It's John Carpenter's The Thing. It's John Carpenter's Escape from New York. It's always his name above the title kind of thing. And Dan had so much to do with co-writing that, designing that, special effecting that, co-starring in it, editing it. I mean, all the lot, okay? And so when I see this John Carpenter's Dark Star, it's not like that's not true. That's true. But I did a cartoon for Diane, and it was a marquee of a movie theater, and it says John Carpenter's Dark Star on the marquee. And I'm walking away on the sidewalk with a stepladder, having just hung a series of signs with gaffer's tape that descend to the sidewalk. It says John Carpenter's Dark Star, co-written by Dan O'Bannon, co-starring Dan O'Bannon, special effects by Dan O'Bannon, edited by Dan O'Bannon. And these signs descend all the way to the sidewalk. It's like, better late than never. Let's give him some credit here, When
was the last time you spoke to John? Are you still in touch with him?
The last time I saw him, I was flown to Kentucky to a film festival when they released the Hyperdrive edition with all the documentary footage in it 5 or 6 years ago, whenever that was.
Yeah.
And he was the featured dude at this thing. And it cost $30 to even have an audience with him.
Wow.
Because I was busy signing. I was at a table. I was busy anyway. But when he finally gave a talk, my wife and I caught up with him, He doesn't really I don't think he wants to talk about Dark Star. The documentary that was done by this guy from Chattanooga, really nice guy, Daniel. I can't think of his last name. But anyway, really nice guy. And John wouldn't give him an interview. The only footage, the only audio he had of John talking about it, he found somewhere, and stuck it in the film, voiceover kind of thing. But it's I think it's sort of beneath John or something, or he's moved, or his relationship with Dan, fell apart. So it might be some pain there for him that I'm not privy to. When I did see him another time when he was filming Village of the Damned, the remake. He filmed that up here in Northern California. And I knew he was filming. I didn't know where. I actually just drove around West County. And lo and behold, I saw all these film trucks. And I just pulled in, and I walked in past security. They didn't see me. And finally, somebody saw me and said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And I explained who I was. They went, "Oh." They said, "Well, John's wife is going to be here in a minute." And so his wife pulled in, and I met her. And she said, hop in the car, I'll take you out to the location. So she drove me out into the fields where they have a lot of fake dead cows. And John walks up to the car, his wife's car. Last thing he expects is to see me in it, right? So that kind of took him aback. And when I told him kind of what I'd been doing, he was sort of disdainful, like, oh, you're still in the business? Well, yeah, I got 7 Cine Gold Eagles and a couple of Emmys. But, you know, because I didn't have the Hollywood cred that he has, it was sort of dismissive. And so that's about it. You know, I still have a warm relationship with Dan O'Bannon's wife. I'm still very much in touch with her. But in terms of John, you know, those are the brief encounters, and they were very brief. And, you know, I'd hope maybe we could catch up at the convention and have a beer or something. I gave him my number, but he never called. You know, it's just like he sort of put it behind him. That's what it feels like.
Well, thank you again.
All right. Well, good luck with your adventure.
Yeah, thank you.